Right guys, welcome to this exam practice video on the psychodynamic approach. For anyone sitting the 2022 exam, this is an in-focus topic. I've got 6 exam questions for you, and because there isn't a huge amount of essay content to go through for this topic, I'm going to cover a couple of shorter answer questions as well. You can see the order that I'm going to be covering things in here, and the links to specific questions are in the description below, so you can jump to different questions if you want. Before we get into it, if you find this video useful, please let me know by giving it a like. Right, just to start with, it's important to remember that the psychodynamic approach has got a lot of content. You've got the unconscious, the structure of personality, defense mechanisms, and the psychosexual stages. There's a lot to say about all of them, but you don't necessarily have to say everything. Very often it's about picking and choosing what things that you want to say that are going to get you the marks in the question that you're answering. If you can't remember much about the approach and you want to have a quick recap, you can click the link at the top of the screen now for the full video lesson. So, our first question is a nice simple 2-marker on the role of the unconscious. There's a lot that you could say, so don't get bogged down with all the possibilities. I would just choose 2 pieces of information and put them in your answer. If you can make them link to each other in some way, that would be even better. So I've gone for this. Protection from trauma and conflict, 1 mark, and the fact that that is done via the use of defense mechanisms, 2 marks. Okay? Nothing special, nothing fancy, just short, snappy, and to the point. So, question number 2 is another 2-marker, but this time it's on the role of defense mechanisms. There's a bit more space to write here, so maybe the exam board are thinking that there's more to say. I've kept it fairly simple, just like with the last question. I've gone for 2 pieces of information, but I've also included some examples. Okay, so there you can see my answer. My 2 main pieces of information are highlighted, but you can also see that I've named denial and repression as examples of defense mechanisms in the first line. So, moving on to question number 3, which is an application question on the use of defense mechanisms. It's nice and simple, and all we have to do is identify the defense mechanism being used and explain what it is and why we think that Jed is using that particular defense mechanism. So we get 1 mark for identifying the fact that Jed is using displacement. We also get 1 mark for explaining what it is. Now remember not to use the word displace to explain what displacement is. It seems like an obvious thing to say, but a lot of people do it because it can be a bit tricky to describe what it is without using the word. But this is something that the examiners commented on at the time when this came up in the actual paper. Then your final mark comes from applying to Jed. Okay, that's the section in the reddy orange colour, and that is the bit where you're saying why you think Jed is using displacement. Okay, so for that bit, remember, refer to the stem because it is an application bit. Okay, question 4 is a 4-mark outline question on the structure of personality. So remember, this is about the id, the ego, and the superego. Now obviously there's loads that you could say about this, but like with all things, and like I said at the beginning of the video, you need to pick and choose what you're going to say, because you could easily write 6 marks or more on the structure of personality. Okay, so make sure you're mentioning each element and giving some detail, but don't go overboard because it's only worth 4 marks and you will run out of time if you give too much information. So this is how I would do it. Be aware of that first sentence where I talk about the fact that personality is made up of 3 parts and then name those 3 parts. That bit is essential if you want to access the full 4 marks. Okay? Obviously, there is a load more that you could say about all 3, but there's no way you're going to say everything in the time. Okay? So I've gone for a couple of pieces of information. 1 or 2 of them get a little bit more. 1 of them gets a little bit less. But overall, there's a nice breadth-depth trade-off. Okay, and that brings us to our final 2 questions, which are both essay questions. So this is my first essay. It is a bog standard 16-marker, outline and evaluate the psychodynamic approach. Okay, so here is my plan. On the left, you can see what I'm going to put in my outline. Now, this is obviously everything that I could potentially put in. I'm going to put a little bit less detail on some of them. So for example, I already know that I'm not going to give very much attention to the defense mechanisms, but the psychosexual stages, for example, is going to get a little bit more. So make sure you know for yourself what you're actually going to do. I won't be able to give them all an equal amount of attention, especially not if I want to keep my outline nice and concise. Okay, I've got 3 evaluation points and 1 counterpoint, so that gives your evaluation section plenty of punch to get a level 4. So let's have a look at what this looks like as an essay. So there's my outline. As you can see, it's slightly longer than some of my previous outlines. It's still just over 200 words, but keep in mind that the psychodynamic approach is an A-level topic, and so there's going to be slightly more to say than in some of the Year 1 topics. You've then got the 3 evaluation points and the counterpoint. The counterpoint is the one in orange. Okay, again, I've said this before, you don't need all of the evaluation points that I put on there. Having 4 evaluation points is an ideal scenario. You can still get a really, really good mark with 3 evaluation points. So if you are going to struggle to remember 4, then don't put yourself under too much pressure. You'll still get a great mark with just 3. So, and this is my second essay. It's an application essay. Now, I searched high and low for an application essay for the psychodynamic approach, and I couldn't find one, so in the end I had to resort to asking a friend to write a scenario for me. Luckily, he loves the psychodynamic approach, and he came up with something that was really good. So this is what we have. There is a lot here that works for the psychodynamic approach, and there's definitely enough there to get the full 4 marks of application in this essay. Okay, there are also a couple of different routes that you could go down within this scenario, but I'll show you what I did in my plan here. Okay, so as you can see, my outline and my evaluation sections of the essay are largely the same as in the last essay, except I've cut 1 evaluation point out because we don't need 4 evaluation points for an application essay. We've got the application section in green, and I've popped down some notes on how the scenario links to the psychodynamic approach. Okay, so first and foremost, Stephen might have an oral fixation. How do I know that? Because he chooses pens. Okay, so that means that he may not have resolved a conflict in the oral stage, which then obviously results in this fixation. Okay, in addition to that, he's got an absent father, and that could result in an unresolved Oedipus complex and therefore an underdeveloped superego. Okay, so that means that his id wouldn't be kept in check and would result in selfish and narcissistic behavior. Okay, because the id gets more control over the ego, and the id is an inherently selfish entity. Okay, so that would result in that selfish behavior that we're seeing in the scenario. It's an interesting stem because there is quite a lot going on there, but actually it all does hang together really, really nicely, and it all revolves around his dad leaving. Obviously, that oral fixation bit, that's a little bit of a bonus. You don't necessarily have to mention it because technically it doesn't link in with the absent father, but it is another bit of application that you can write about and that will get you marks. Okay? So let's have a look at this in the essay. So you can see the outline is the same as in the last essay, but then we've got that bit about Stephen there. Okay, so I've tried to put Stephen and his selfish ways into sentences for you in a way that makes sense. Hopefully it all does. Okay. And then you've got my 3 evaluation points to finish that off. And that wraps up this video. So I appreciate it's been a little bit of a whistle-stop tour through exam possibilities for the psychodynamic approach, but I hope it's been useful. The psychodynamic approach can be a little bit tricky to write about because of the sheer amount of content, but if you practice writing it a couple of times, you'll soon work out how you want to structure it, and you'll soon work out what works for you. Okay? Please pop any questions in the comment section below, and I will do my best to get back to you ASAP. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.